I caught my husband financing his mistress, so I orchestrated a surprise family reunion for my in-laws and her parents directly at their favorite romantic table. The credit card receipt in my hand was trembling, and it certainly was not from the morning breeze blowing through our open bedroom window. My name is Vivian. I am 32 years old, and for the last 7 years, I believed I was living the ultimate American dream. I work as a forensic accountant for a top-tier corporate law firm here in Austin, Texas. Basically, my entire career revolves around finding money that people are trying very hard to hide. I track down embezzled corporate funds, hidden marital assets, and offshore accounts. I am trained to look for the invisible cracks in perfectly painted walls. But the thing about being an expert at spotting lies is that your brain flat-out refuses to see the deception when it is sleeping right next to you in your own bed. My husband, Nolan, is 34. He is the chief executive officer of a highly successful tech startup downtown. But he was not always the polished, custom suit-wearing executive he is today. When we got married in our mid-20s, we had absolutely nothing. I worked grueling 80-hour weeks at an entry-level accounting job just to keep our lights on and pay our rent while Nolan coded his software in our tiny, roach-infested apartment. I ate cheap instant noodles for 3 years so he could afford server space. I sacrificed my own comfort, my sleep, and my youth to build his foundation. And it worked. His company took off. We bought a beautiful 5-bedroom house in the Westlake Hills neighborhood, and we finally made it. Or so I thought. It was a typical Tuesday morning. Nolan had kissed my forehead, smelling like expensive cedarwood cologne, and told me he had an early breakfast meeting with some software developers. After his Tesla quietly pulled out of our driveway, I started picking up the bedroom. I grabbed his navy blue blazer from the back of the armchair to take it to the dry cleaners. As I checked the pockets, my fingers brushed against a crumpled, slightly damp piece of paper. It was a physical receipt. I pulled it out and smoothed it over the marble countertop of our bathroom. It was from Uchi, arguably the most exclusive and romantic Japanese restaurant in the entire city of Austin. The date printed at the top was last Thursday. The total amount charged to his secondary credit card was $420. I stared at the itemized list. 2 tasting menus. 2 glasses of premium imported champagne. 2 servings of an incredibly expensive caviar dish. A cold, heavy rock dropped into the bottom of my stomach. Last Thursday, Nolan had called me around 6 in the evening. He told me he was stuck at a boring tech seminar at a hotel conference center and that they were feeding him stale sandwiches. He had even complained about how dry the turkey was. He did not come home until almost midnight, claiming he had stayed to network with some out-of-town investors. But this piece of paper told a completely different story. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. In my line of work, a $400 dinner receipt is never just a $400 dinner receipt. It is a thread. And if you pull that thread hard enough, the entire sweater usually unravels. I folded the receipt, slid it into my pocket, and took a deep breath. I was not going to scream. I was not going to call him crying. I am a forensic accountant. I do not act on emotion. I act on verified data. That evening, I decided to give the man I loved one single chance to tell me the truth. I cooked his favorite meal, poured 2 glasses of red wine, and waited for him to come home. When Nolan walked through the front door, he looked exhausted but happy. He dropped his briefcase, wrapped his arms around my waist, and kissed my neck. It felt so incredibly normal that I almost second-guessed myself. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe he took an important client out and lied about the seminar because he did not want me to worry about business expenses. We sat down at the dining table. Halfway through dinner, I kept my voice light, completely casual, like I was discussing the weather. I took a sip of my wine and looked across the table. I told him I was getting his blazer ready for the cleaners and found a receipt from Uchi from last Thursday. I asked him, with a soft smile, if the tech seminar had moved their catering to a 5-star sushi restaurant. Nolan did not choke on his food. He did not drop his fork. His heart rate did not even seem to elevate. He gave a soft, exasperated chuckle and shook his head. He looked me right in the eyes with that charming, boyish smile that had made me fall in love with him 7 years ago. He told me that the seminar was indeed terrible, but an older male investor from California had wanted to discuss a potential buyout over a private dinner. He said he took the guy to Uchi to impress him, and he did not tell me because the buyout talks were strictly confidential, and he did not want to get my hopes up if the deal fell through. It was a brilliant lie. It was logical, it flattered his business acumen, and it completely explained the expensive meal. He then reached across the table, placed his warm hand over mine, and gave me a look of deep concern. He told me that I had been working way too many late nights at my law firm. He said my job dealing with fraudsters all day was making me paranoid and stressed out, and that I needed to relax and trust him more. He was actively trying to make me feel crazy for questioning him. But Nolan made one critical mistake. While he was holding my right hand and speaking with absolute conviction, I looked down at his left hand resting on the table. He was subtly rubbing his left thumb against his index finger. Repeatedly. It was a microscopic nervous tic. A physical tell he had possessed since he was 25 years old. He only ever did it when he was lying through his teeth. He was gaslighting me. He was sitting in the beautiful dining room that my early sacrifices had helped pay for, looking me in the face and feeding me poison wrapped in honey. I smiled back at him, squeezed his hand, and apologized for overreacting. I told him I loved him and that I was just tired. I played the part of the compliant, relieved wife perfectly. But inside, every ounce of warmth I held for this man vanished, replaced by a freezing, hyper-focused clarity. I waited until 2 in the morning. The house was completely silent, save for the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of my husband sleeping deeply beside me in our king-sized bed. I slipped out from under the heavy duvet, grabbed my laptop from my home office, and went downstairs to the kitchen. I made a cup of black coffee, sat at the kitchen island, and opened my computer. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room. It was time to go to work. 5 years ago, when Nolan's company was just starting to scale up, I was the one who set up his entire corporate accounting infrastructure. I built the spreadsheets, integrated the payroll software, and established the expense tracking protocols. Because I was doing this for free on my weekends, I had created a hidden administrative backdoor access for myself so I could fix his bookkeeping errors without having to constantly ask him for his changing passwords. He had completely forgotten I had this access. Or maybe he just underestimated me. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the main security gateway and entered the master ledger for his company's operational accounts. I bypassed his current chief financial officer's dashboard and went straight into the raw data. I pulled up the primary corporate credit card statements for the last 12 months. I hit the search bar and typed in the word Uchi. The results populated instantly, and the sheer volume of data felt like a physical punch to the throat. It was not just one dinner. It was a highly organized, recurring pattern. Every single Thursday for the past 6 months, there was a charge. $350, $420, $480, all at the exact same high-end restaurant, all taking place between 7 and 10 in the evening. My eyes scanned further down the rows of data. It was not just sushi. There were charges for luxury boutique hotels downtown, usually booked on alternating Friday afternoons. $250 for a day rate room. There were charges at expensive cocktail lounges. There were charges at a high-end lingerie boutique totaling nearly $800 over 2 months. I looked down at my own faded cotton pajamas and felt a bitter, acidic laugh rise in my throat. He was living a completely double life. Every time he told me he had a late networking event, every time he claimed he was exhausted from a board meeting, he was actually out spending the money we had built together on someone else. I sat in the dark kitchen for 3 hours, downloading every single transaction, every hidden expense report, and every fraudulent receipt into an encrypted file on my personal hard drive. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is a biological response to loss, and right then, I did not feel like I had lost anything. I felt like I had just been handed the winning lottery ticket to his destruction. I closed my laptop just as the sun started to peek over the Austin skyline. The perfect mirage of my marriage was completely shattered, but the pieces were razor sharp, and I was going to use them to cut him to the bone. The next morning, I went to my office at the law firm, bypassing the coffee machine and heading straight for the desk of my closest colleague and friend, Clara. Clara is 35, sharp as a tack, and survived a brutal divorce from a cheating husband 3 years ago. If anyone knows how to navigate the murky waters of marital betrayal, it is her. I dropped my encrypted flash drive onto her desk and simply said, "I need a war room." We booked a private conference room at the end of the hall, shut the blinds, and projected the downloaded financial data onto the large screen. Clara sat there with her iced Americano, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the list of expenses. She whistled low, shaking her head. "Nolan has been a very busy boy," she muttered. "But Vivian, these restaurant and hotel charges are bad, but they are just the appetizer. Look at the vendor payment ledger." She highlighted a specific row in the accounting software. It was a recurring monthly wire transfer originating from Nolan's corporate operating account. Every first of the month, exactly $2,500 was being transferred to an entity registered as Stella Architectural Consulting, LLC. I stared at the screen, my forensic brain immediately flagging the anomaly. Nolan runs a software development company. They lease a fully furnished office space in a high-rise building. They write code. They do not build houses, they do not renovate commercial spaces, and they absolutely do not need a permanent architectural consultant on a monthly retainer. It was a classic phantom vendor scheme. It is a textbook method for siphoning money out of a business without raising immediate red flags to the tax authorities. "Let us find out who our brilliant architect is," Clara said, her fingers dancing across her keyboard as she logged into the State Business Registry database. It took her less than 5 minutes to pull the public formation documents for the LLC. The sole proprietor and registered agent was a woman named Stella. She was 29 years old. We immediately moved to social media. Searching her name yielded an immaculate Instagram profile. Stella presented herself as an elite, high society interior designer and architectural visionary. Her feed was an endless scroll of perfectly curated aesthetics. Photos of her sipping expensive lattes, posing in designer clothes, and standing inside half-finished luxury homes. She had this effortless, wealthy Austin vibe that made my stomach churn. But as I scrolled through her glamorous photos, I realized something sickening. The timeline of her sudden elevation in lifestyle perfectly matched the timeline of the phantom vendor payments from Nolan's company. I was looking at a woman whose entire luxurious existence was being subsidized by my husband. He was legally stealing from our joint marital assets, categorizing it as a business expense, to play sugar daddy to a 29-year-old fake architect. The level of premeditated financial manipulation was breathtaking. Clara and I spent the next 4 hours matching the dates of Nolan's mysterious absences with the corporate credit card charges. We were building an unbreakable timeline of infidelity. But then we hit a transaction that made the air completely leave my lungs. It was buried deep in a secondary rewards point account associated with the corporate card. A single, massive transaction categorized vaguely as executive corporate gifting. The amount was exactly $4,000. The vendor was Cartier. The date of the transaction was October 14th of last year. I stared at that date on the screen until the numbers blurred. October 14th. My mind violently pulled me back to that exact day. It was our 6th wedding anniversary. I had taken the afternoon off work, bought expensive steaks, and spent hours cooking a beautiful dinner to celebrate our milestone. Nolan had come home 2 hours late, looking flustered. He had walked through the front door holding a cheap, plastic-wrapped bouquet of daisies he had obviously bought from a gas station on his drive home. The edges of the petals were literally turning brown. I remembered standing in our kitchen, wearing a nice dress, holding those pathetic $10 flowers. He had kissed my cheek and given me a speech about how his startup was going through a crucial cash flow phase and how he needed to be frugal with personal spending right now. He thanked me for being so understanding and supportive. I had smiled, put the dying flowers in a vase, and told him that his presence was the only gift I needed. While I was standing in my kitchen accepting wilted gas station daisies out of love and understanding, he had just swiped his credit card for a $4,000 piece of Cartier jewelry for a woman he was sleeping with in cheap downtown hotel rooms. The physical reaction hit me so hard and so fast I barely had time to react. I pushed my chair back, ran out of the conference room, and barely made it into the employee restroom before I threw up. I locked myself in a bathroom stall, sank to the cold tile floor, and finally let the grief hit me. I hyperventilated, my chest tight, tears streaming down my face, ruining my professional makeup. The betrayal was so deep, so profoundly cruel, that it felt like my bones were vibrating. I sat on that bathroom floor for 20 minutes, mourning the 7 years of my life I had given to a man who did not exist. I mourned the late nights, the sacrifices, the unconditional support I had poured into a black hole. But as the tears finally stopped, the sadness evaporated. The suffocating heat of the Texas afternoon outside the frosted window felt like a furnace, and I let that heat settle right into my core. I stood up, washed my face in the sink, applied a fresh coat of red lipstick, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The victim was dead. The forensic accountant was back. I walked back into the war room, my posture straight, my expression completely blank. Clara looked up from her monitors, saw the look in my eyes, and nodded silently. She knew that the grieving period was officially over. It was time to go to war. "I have something else, Vivian," Clara said softly, turning one of the monitors toward me. "While you were out, I ran a comprehensive background check on Stella using our firm's investigative software. I wanted to see if she had any previous bankruptcies or civil suits we could leverage. But I found something much, much worse." I looked at the screen. It was a digital copy of a public marriage certificate filed in Travis County 4 years ago. Stella was not a single, independent woman playing the field. She was legally married. I read the name of her spouse. Weston. Age 33. I pulled up Weston's public records. He was not a tech bro. He was not a wealthy businessman. Weston was an active duty officer in the United States Army. Clara clicked another link, bringing up a public military family support newsletter from 6 months ago. There was a photo of Weston in his full uniform, smiling next to Stella. The caption beneath the photo read, "Wishing a safe deployment to Officer Weston as he begins his 12-month tour of duty at Camp Humphreys in South Korea." A profound, sickening disgust washed over me. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Weston was thousands of miles away in South Korea, serving his country, sleeping in a military barracks, and earning a modest government salary. Meanwhile, his wife, Stella, remained in Austin. She was collecting his military housing allowance and using her status as a deployed soldier's wife to garner sympathy, while simultaneously extracting thousands of dollars a month from my husband's tech company to fund her designer lifestyle. It was not just simple infidelity anymore. It was parasitic. Nolan and Stella had found each other in the gutter of human morality and decided to build a luxury condo there. They were systematically draining the resources of 2 separate marriages to fund their twisted romance. I looked at Clara, my voice cold and steady. Nolan thinks he is a genius for hiding his money in fake architectural firms. Stella thinks she is untouchable because her husband is on the other side of the planet. They think they're playing a brilliant game of chess. I picked up my encrypted flash drive from the desk and gripped it tightly in my hand. But they forgot one very important detail. They are playing chess against the person who built the board. I am going to burn their entire world to the ground, and I am going to make sure their families have front row seats to the fire. If you are enjoying this story so far, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps push this video to more people, and I truly appreciate your support. The hardest part of any undercover investigation is not the late nights poring over encrypted spreadsheets or the adrenaline rush of tracking digital footprints. The hardest part is sitting across from the target, looking them in the eyes, and pretending that everything is perfectly fine. For the next 2 weeks, I had to be the most loving, supportive, and completely oblivious wife on the planet. If Nolan suspected even for a second that I knew about his double life, he would immediately move the money, delete the files, and start building a defensive legal wall. I could not let that happen. That Sunday, I faced my first major test. We had our standing monthly brunch with Nolan's parents, Victor and Caroline. We met them at their exclusive country club overlooking the rolling hills just outside the city. Victor and Caroline were old money Texas, the kind of people who cared more about their public reputation and country club status than they did about actual human decency. They were also the primary angel investors who had provided the initial seed money for Nolan's software company, a fact they never, ever let me forget. We sat on the outdoor patio under a white linen umbrella. I was wearing a conservative floral sundress, sipping a mimosa, while Caroline inspected me over the rim of her coffee cup. She had always made it subtly clear that she thought her brilliant, handsome son had settled by marrying a hardworking accountant instead of a high-society heiress. "You look exhausted, Vivian," Caroline said, her tone dripping with that specific brand of Southern condescension. "Are you still working those terrible hours at that law firm? You really should consider cutting back. Nolan is carrying the entire family financially with his company now. He needs a wife who is rested and available to support him, not someone who comes home smelling like office coffee at 8 at night." I looked at Nolan. My husband, the man who is currently funneling thousands of dollars of our marital assets to a fake architect, gave me a patronizing smile. He reached over, patted my hand, and sighed heavily. "I tell her the same thing, Mom," Nolan said, playing the role of the tired, generous provider perfectly. "But Vivian loves her spreadsheets. She just cannot help herself. I am happy to carry the financial burden, so she can play around with her little numbers." It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to pick up my glass and throw the mimosa directly into his face. I was the one who ate instant noodles for 3 years so he could afford to buy server space. I was the one who built his accounting system from scratch. He was not carrying the family. He was robbing the family. But I forced my facial muscles to relax. I smiled sweetly at Caroline, took a polite bite of my Eggs Benedict, and nodded. "You are absolutely right, Caroline," I said smoothly. "Nolan is working so hard right now. In fact, I have been looking into all of his recent business expenditures, and it is truly amazing how much he is investing into new partnerships. I am just so proud of his creative financial management." Nolan beamed, completely missing the razor-sharp sarcasm hidden beneath my words. Victor nodded in approval, giving a toast to his son's business acumen. I sat there for another hour, enduring their elitist bragging, finding a dark, comforting solace in the fact that I held a metaphorical hand grenade under the table. They loved their reputation. They loved their pristine public image. And I was going to use that exact obsession to completely destroy them. By the following Wednesday, I had mapped out every single financial transaction connected to Stella Architectural Consulting. I knew how much Nolan was paying her, and I knew about the Cartier jewelry. But there was one piece of physical evidence I still needed to verify. Buried deep in the corporate operating account was a monthly recurring charge of $3,500 for an off-site corporate leasing space. According to the paperwork Nolan had filed with his chief financial officer, this was a creative studio space, meant for out-of-town developers to use when visiting Austin. The address listed was right in the middle of downtown. I decided to take my lunch break and go see this so-called creative studio for myself. I drove my car into the downtown district and parked halfway down the block from the address. I sat in the driver's seat, the harsh Texas afternoon sun beating down on my windshield, and stared out the passenger window. It was not a commercial office building. It was not a co-working space. It was a brand-new, ultra-luxury, high-rise condominium complex with a private security desk and a valet parking service. I pulled out my laptop, connected to my mobile hotspot, and cross-referenced the property management company's website with the lease agreement I had downloaded from Nolan's hidden files. The unit number was on the 14th floor. It was a one-bedroom luxury loft featuring floor-to-ceiling windows, a private balcony, and imported Italian marble countertops. My husband had used our joint marital assets, disguised through his company, to rent a permanent love nest for his mistress. As I sat there processing the sheer audacity of a $3,500 a month apartment, a sleek black Tesla Model S turned the corner and pulled into the resident parking garage. I recognized the license plate immediately. It was Nolan. It was 1 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. He had told me that morning he was going to be locked in a server room all day dealing with a critical software bug. Instead, he was pulling into the private garage of a luxury condo to spend his afternoon with a woman whose husband was currently wearing a military uniform on the other side of the planet. I pulled out my phone and recorded a video of his car entering the private gate. I documented the exact time, the date, and the location. The heat inside my car was sweltering, but my blood ran ice cold. Up until this point, a small, pathetic part of my brain had wondered if maybe this was just a physical affair. A terrible, expensive mistake. But you do not sign a 12-month lease on a luxury condo for a mistake. You do not buy $4,000 necklaces for a fling. Nolan and Stella were playing house. They were building an alternate reality funded by my sweat and Weston's military benefits. I put my car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I did not feel sad anymore. The grief had been completely burned away, leaving nothing but a hardened shell of pure, professional determination. I was an auditor. I had found the fraud. Now it was time to issue the penalty. I drove straight back to my law firm, locked the door to my office, and sat down at my desk. I had all the financial records, the lease agreements, the receipts, and the photographic evidence of the condo. The trap was fully constructed. Now, I needed to secure the most explosive element of my plan. I needed to bring Weston into the fold. Reaching an active-duty military officer deployed at Camp Humphreys in South Korea is not as simple as looking up a phone number on Google. But being a forensic accountant at a prestigious corporate law firm gives you access to a massive network of legal resources and back channels. I called a former colleague who now worked as a civilian contractor for the Department of Defense. I told him I was handling an urgent, highly sensitive legal matter involving severe financial fraud, and I needed a direct line to the base liaison officer in South Korea. Within 2 hours, I had a secure email address for Weston's commanding officer. I drafted a very careful, highly professional message. I did not sound like a crazy jealous wife. I wrote the email using my official firm letterhead, stating that I had uncovered a massive financial exploitation case targeting Officer Weston's military housing benefits and marital assets. I requested an urgent, private phone call with Weston. The time difference was the tricky part. South Korea is 14 hours ahead of Texas. I requested the call be scheduled for exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, Central Standard Time on Thursday. That would be 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday in Korea. It would ensure Weston was awake, at the base, and in a secure location where he could receive the call. The next morning, I received a confirmation email from the base liaison. Weston had been informed of the urgent legal inquiry and would be standing by for a secure phone call at the requested time. My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. The final piece was locked into place. I spent the rest of the day finalizing the physical evidence. I went to a high-end print shop and had 4 identical presentation folders made. I used thick, expensive cardstock. Inside each folder, I placed a highlighted copy of the fake architectural consulting payments. I included the Cartier receipt. I included the lease agreement for the downtown condo. And I included the public marriage certificate proving Stella was legally married to an active-duty soldier. I bound them perfectly, making them look like professional quarterly financial reports. That night, Nolan came home complaining about how exhausted he was from dealing with the software bugs all day. I stood in the kitchen, rubbing his shoulders, listening to him lie about his stressful afternoon in the server room. I kissed his cheek and told him he was the hardest working man I knew. I told him he deserved a special reward for all his efforts. He smiled, completely unaware that the executioner's axe was already swinging down toward his neck. Monday morning arrived, leaving me with exactly 3 days to orchestrate the most important dinner party of my life. The venue was already decided. It had to be Uchi. It was their sanctuary, the place where Nolan had spent thousands of my dollars wining and dining his mistress. I called the restaurant and requested to speak with the private events coordinator. I booked their exclusive VIP dining room for Thursday night at 7:30 in the evening, securing the reservation with my own corporate credit card. Now came the delicate task of ensuring all the key players arrived at the exact same time, completely unaware of what they were walking into. I picked up my phone and made the first call to Nolan's parents. Victor answered on the second ring, his booming Texas voice echoing through the speaker. I put on my brightest, most enthusiastic tone. "Victor," I said, "I have some incredible news. Nolan's company has just secured a massive, game-changing partnership. It is going to elevate the startup to a completely new level. We are hosting a highly exclusive, private investor dinner this Thursday at AITA to celebrate, and Nolan specifically asked if you and Caroline would be the guests of honor." I knew exactly which buttons to push. Victor loved feeling like the vital patriarch of the business, and Caroline would never miss an opportunity to show off at a high-end restaurant. They accepted immediately, promising to drive into the city and arrive exactly at 7:30. The second call required far more finesse. I had to invite Stella's parents. Through Clara's background checks, I knew that Stella's father was Judge Zachary, a highly respected and famously strict Superior Court judge in Travis County. Her mother, Josephine, sat on the board of 3 different local charities. They were a family obsessed with integrity, public service, and unblemished social standing. I dialed Judge Zachary's office and managed to get routed to his private line by using my law firm's credentials. "Judge Zachary," I said, maintaining a crisp, professional tone. "My name is Vivian. I represent a major technology firm here in Austin. Your daughter, Stella, has been providing some truly remarkable consulting work for us over the past few months. We are hosting a private dinner at AITA this Thursday to finalize a massive city council partnership project she has been spearheading. We wanted to surprise her by having her esteemed parents there to witness the celebration of her hard work." There was a brief pause on the line. I held my breath. Then, the judge's deep, authoritative voice came back. "Well, Vivian, Stella has always been incredibly ambitious. Her mother and I would be absolutely delighted to attend and support her professional achievements." I thanked him, confirmed the time, and hung up the phone. My hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Both sets of parents were locked in. They were expecting a night of celebration, pride, and corporate success. I looked at the 4 heavy, black presentation folders sitting on the corner of my desk. They were about to get a presentation, all right. Thursday evening finally arrived. The air in Austin was thick and humid, but inside our house, the atmosphere felt brittle enough to snap. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, getting ready for war. I did not dress to look like a heartbroken wife. I dressed to look like the expensive, highly educated corporate assassin that I was. I chose a tailored, charcoal gray power suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and a pair of sharp black heels. I applied a bold, unapologetic shade of red lipstick. Nolan walked into the bedroom, struggling to tie his silk necktie. He looked pale, and there was a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. All week, I had been vaguely mentioning that we had a mandatory dinner meeting with some conservative investors on Thursday night. He had been acting jittery and evasive all day. "Vivian," he started, clearing his throat nervously. "I think I need to back out of this dinner tonight. My stomach is in absolute knots. I think I caught that flu bug that is going around the office. You should just go without me and make my apologies to the investors." I turned around slowly, my eyes locking onto his. I knew exactly why his stomach was in knots. Every Thursday at 8 o'clock, he had a standing date with Stella at a downtown hotel. He was panicking because my fake business dinner was interfering with his adulterous schedule, and he was desperately trying to find a way to escape so he could go meet his mistress. I walked over to him, reached up, and tightened his tie for him, pulling it just a fraction of an inch tighter than comfortable. "Nolan," I said, my voice dropping into a dangerously calm register. "Your parents drove 3 hours from the country club specifically for this dinner. There are people attending tonight who have cleared their entire schedules just to meet you. If you do not walk out that front door with me right now, the investors will pull their funding, and your parents will be humiliated. You are going to this dinner." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against the tight silk collar. He nodded mutely. The drive to the restaurant took 25 minutes, and it was the quietest car ride of our entire 7-year marriage. Nolan kept checking his phone in the cup holder, his leg bouncing anxiously. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, my heart beating in a slow, steady, absolute rhythm. We pulled up to the valet stand outside AITA. The neon sign glowed softly in the twilight. Nolan handed his keys to the attendant, looking like a man walking toward a firing squad. He had no idea how right he was. I grabbed my leather briefcase from the back seat, the heavy weight of the 4 evidence folders resting perfectly against my hip. I smiled at my husband. "Let us go celebrate your success, Nolan." We walked through the dim, beautifully ambient main dining room of the restaurant. The hostess smiled warmly at us. "Good evening, you must be the hosts for the private room. Your guests have already arrived and are getting acquainted." We followed her down a short hallway toward the VIP suite. Through the frosted glass doors, I could hear the murmur of polite, upper-class conversation. I pushed the heavy wooden door open, and we stepped inside. The room was stunning, lit by modern paper lanterns. Sitting around the large mahogany table were Victor and Caroline, sipping sparkling water. Sitting directly across from them were Judge Zachary and Josephine. They were deep in a polite conversation about local Austin real estate. 4 of the most prominent, reputation-obsessed parents in the state of Texas, sitting in one room, completely unaware of the explosive connection they shared. Nolan stepped into the room behind me. I watched his face as his eyes registered the people sitting at the table. He saw his parents, and he forced a weak smile. Then, his eyes drifted across the table and landed on Judge Zachary. I knew from my research that Nolan had attended several elite charity galas with Stella, meaning he absolutely recognized her powerful father. All the blood instantly drained from Nolan's face. He turned a sickening shade of gray. He took a half-step backward, bumping into the doorframe, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked wildly at me, absolute panic screaming in his eyes, but I completely ignored him. "Welcome, everyone," I said loudly, projecting my voice with absolute confidence. "Thank you all so much for coming. Please, Nolan, take a seat right there at the head of the table." Victor stood up, smiling proudly. "Vivian, Nolan, it is wonderful to see you. We were just getting to know Zachary and Josephine. It turns out the judge is a big fan of Nolan's software developments." Before Nolan could even attempt to form a coherent sentence, the heavy wooden door behind us clicked open again. It was exactly 7:55. I turned around. Standing in the doorway was Stella. She was wearing a skin-tight, backless red cocktail dress, clearly expecting a romantic, candlelit dinner with her wealthy tech CEO boyfriend. She walked 2 steps into the room, a seductive smile playing on her lips, before she finally looked up and took in the scene. She saw Nolan standing there, looking like a corpse. She saw a woman she did not know holding a briefcase. And then, her eyes locked onto her parents. Stella froze. Her designer handbag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the wooden floor with a soft thud. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, her brain desperately trying to process the impossible nightmare she had just walked into. "Ah, perfect timing," I said, my voice ringing clearly through the sudden, suffocating silence of the room. I walked over and pulled out the empty chair right in the center of the table. "Everyone, the guest of honor has arrived. Please, let me officially introduce Stella, Nolan's very expensive, full-time architectural consultant." The silence in the VIP room was so absolute you could hear the ambient jazz music playing softly out in the main restaurant. Nobody moved. Stella stood frozen near the door, her face stark white against her red dress. Nolan had collapsed into his chair, staring blindly at his empty water glass, looking like he was praying for the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Judge Zachary was the first to speak. He looked at his daughter, his thick eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "Stella? What are you wearing?" "I thought this was a corporate dinner to celebrate your city council project." "There is no city council project, Your Honor," I said calmly. I walked to the center of the room, unlatched my leather briefcase, and pulled out the 4 thick presentation folders. I placed one directly in front of Victor, one in front of Caroline, one in front of Josephine, and the last one directly in front of the judge. I stood at the head of the table, resting my hands on the mahogany wood. For the last 6 months, my husband has been funneling roughly $5,000 a month out of his startup company. He categorized these as corporate expenses to avoid raising flags with his investors. I looked directly at Victor, whose face was already turning an angry shade of purple. The money was not being used for software development. It was being used to fund a fake architectural consulting firm, purchase luxury jewelry, and pay a monthly lease on a luxury downtown condominium. Caroline gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. "Vivian, what on earth are you saying?" "I am saying that my husband has been stealing marital assets and investor capital to finance an affair with your daughter," I said, shifting my gaze to Josephine. "Please, open the folders." The bank statements are highlighted in yellow. The Cartier receipts are on page 3. The photographs of the condo are on page 4. The sound of thick paper flipping filled the room. The air grew incredibly toxic. Judge Zachary stared at the itemized credit card bills, his judicial composure completely shattering. He looked up at Stella, his voice trembling with a terrifying, quiet rage. "Stella Elizabeth, you have been running a fraudulent LLC to take money from a married man?" Stella finally found her voice, a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Daddy, please, it is not what it looks like. Nolan and I love each other. We were going to come clean. We were planning a future together." "That is fascinating, Stella," I interrupted, pulling my cell phone out of my pocket. "Because usually, when someone plans a future with a new partner, they have the decency to divorce their current husband first. Especially when that husband is risking his life overseas." I unlocked my phone, dialed the international military liaison number, and placed the phone flat on the center of the table. I hit the speaker button. The line rang twice before a crisp, exhausted, and incredibly angry voice echoed through the dining room. "This is Officer Weston speaking." Stella screamed. She actually let out a guttural, horrifying scream and covered her face with her hands. Josephine let out a sobbing gasp. "Officer Weston," I said clearly. "This is Vivian. I have the entire family gathered here, along with your wife. Have you reviewed the encrypted evidence files I sent to your commanding officer this morning?" "Yes, ma'am, I have." Weston's voice boomed through the speaker, carrying the absolute authority of a military commander. "Stella, I have already initiated the emergency divorce proceedings through the Judge Advocate General's office. Furthermore, I have reported your fraudulent use of my military housing allowance to the military police. You are going to face federal fraud charges for stealing government benefits while simultaneously extracting stolen corporate funds from Mr. Nolan's company. I will not be returning your calls. Do not ever contact my family again." The line clicked dead. The bomb had successfully detonated. The aftermath at the table was nothing short of a massacre. Victor stood up, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He looked down at Nolan, who was weeping silently into his hands. "You stole from your own company to fund a military wife's shopping habit," Victor spat, his voice laced with absolute venom. "I am pulling every single dime of my investment tomorrow morning. I will see you in bankruptcy court, you pathetic excuse for a son." He grabbed Caroline by the arm and stormed out of the room. Judge Zachary did not yell. He slowly closed the folder, stood up, and looked at Stella with eyes colder than a Texas winter. "You have disgraced this family's name," he said quietly. "You have betrayed a man wearing the uniform of our country. You are completely cut off. Do not bother coming to our house tonight. You can sleep in that downtown condo you love so much, at least until the federal investigators seize it." He and Josephine walked out, leaving Stella sobbing hysterically on the floor. I did not say another word. I picked up my empty briefcase, walked past my weeping husband and his destroyed mistress, and walked out into the warm, beautiful Austin night. I tipped the valet a $100 bill, got into my car, and drove away. Fast forward 6 months. I am currently sitting in my brand new corner office overlooking Lady Bird Lake. The view is absolutely spectacular. When Victor pulled his funding, Nolan's startup immediately defaulted on its loans. In the divorce settlement, I leveraged the mountain of evidence proving his financial embezzlement to secure complete ownership of the company's remaining intellectual property, which I subsequently sold to a competitor for a massive profit. Nolan is currently living in a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of the city, working a miserable, entry-level tech support job, spending half his meager paycheck on the legal fees he owes me. Stella's life imploded with equal magnitude. Judge Zachary kept his word and completely disowned her. Without his influence and money to protect her, she lost her architectural consulting license pending the federal fraud investigation regarding the military benefits. Weston divorced her swiftly and ruthlessly, taking everything. The last I heard from Clara, Stella was working retail at a local mall, desperately trying to pay off the massive mountain of debt she accumulated once the stolen funds dried up. Meanwhile, I took the capital from the software sale and opened my own independent forensic accounting firm. I specialize exclusively in helping spouses uncover hidden assets and financial infidelity during high-net-worth divorces. Business is absolutely booming. So, looking back at the smoking crater of my ex-husband's life and the absolute destruction of his mistress's fake empire, a small part of me wonders if dropping a nuclear bomb on their entire existence in front of their families was going too far. Am I the asshole? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button to join the family and never miss a story.